The Green Ops podcast is brought to you by Sons of Liberty Gunworks, Vertex, Blue Force Gear, Spotter Up, F3 Tactical, and Tenacore.
I want to address the skeptics right now. There are people listening to this who think YouTube idiots are telling me that all I have to do is write down what I want and it'll happen.
Welcome to the Green Ops podcast, where we give you tips and tricks each week to become harder to kill. My name is Luke. I am your host and an instructor with Green Ops, joined today by a mentor of mine. He's taken my level of shooting to further than I ever thought I could. But that is Steve Anderson from Anderson Shooting. Today we're going to talk specifically Anderson Shooting, obviously, but he is a mental game guru. And so I kind of want to talk about the mental aspect of firearms. But before we get going, I want to ask you to like, subscribe, share. Make sure you leave us a 5-star review. Our marketing budget rhymes with hero. So it is basically everything that you guys do for us is how we market this podcast. So if you could do those simple things like subscribe, share, send to a friend, that would help us out greatly. So with that, Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And by the way, we have the exact same marketing model here at andersonshooting.com. We have a marketing department that gets to make announcements in the first 30 seconds of the podcast. So yeah, we're on the same model.
Absolutely. But somehow it's working. So,
yeah.
Which is perfect.
And what's really funny is people will periodically ask me for advice on podcasts. I don't think you ever did. But that's fine. Lanny Basham has called me 4 times to ask me for advice on podcasts. And I always say, you can do what I do, but you may not want to. You know, the best thing you can do to start a podcast is to have something to say, turn on the microphone and start talking.
Right. Well, I got the advice from Mike Green, the owner of Green Ops, and I was talking about doing it, and he said, you know what? The problem is excellence is the downfall of progress. I was trying to make everything perfect from minute 1, and he's like, you're never going to do it because you're never going to get to that level. So just like you said, start talking about something in a microphone and go from there.
Yeah, I had the benefit of growing up on talk radio. I had a job where I was driving a bunch, and I discovered AM talk radio. So I have probably 20 years of listening to talk radio under my belt before I ever did my first podcast.
So with that, for those who don't know who Steve Anderson is and your shooting path / career, or maybe even let's go slam circus career.
Oh, wow.
As far back as you want to go, tell the listeners who is Steve Anderson.
All right, sure. So I grew up non-gun. My family was not anti-gun in any way. We were just non-gun. We weren't hunters. My dad was the high school marching band director and the minister of music at the big church. I have Christian music teachers going back 3 generations on both sides. So we were just non-gun. And I was a rock and roll guitar player, got interested in Van Halen as a young kid. And once I made a noise that sounded like Eddie Van Halen, even remotely, I was hooked. It was the same thing that happened when I got my open gun. Once I realized I could control this thing, it felt like I had a lightsaber in my hand, right? So put out my first album with Slam Circus when I was 15. We did 2 more self-produced, self-released albums. And then I'm sure you remember the day that Smells Like Teen Spirit came out on the radio. And anybody that was in a long-haired, smiling band, it was just over because now they wanted flannel and frowns. Well, I don't do flannel and I don't do frowns. So I quit the band, and they went on to do some stuff in the grunge world. I had a decent amount of success, and I started working in record stores. And so I was the area manager for a chain of record stores. Many of your viewers will need to look up a compact disc to see what those were. We used to sell those used, right? So you'd buy Pink Floyd The Wall, you'd get tired of it, you'd come sell it to me for beer money, and then I'll just mark it up and resell it. And one day I got robbed by a guy with a K-bar knife. And I'm sure you know what a K-bar is. So this guy comes through the door with a with his girlfriend. His girlfriend does some business. He goes to leave and sets off my alarm. Well, we get to talking about why my alarm's going off, and pretty soon he's pointing a K-bar at me. And he took two pretty good swings at me, and I dodged both of them. And then he wound up doing 28 days of a 6-month sentence for aggravated menacing. And when he got out of jail, the prosecutor called me and said, "Hey, we want you to know." His last name was Green, by the way. Not we won't give his full name, but his last name was Green. So that was my first green op. I'll never forget his face though. But anyway, I said, "What should I do? I got this pink piece of paper. It says you can't come around." And the guy goes, "Well, you should think about getting a gun." And at that time, the prevailing wisdom from Masad Ayub was get whatever gun your local PD carries because that's better in court. Have you heard that one before?
Yes.
Okay. So at that time, Columbus PD, Columbus, Ohio, Smith & Wesson 5906 or 4506. So I got a 5906. I loved that gun. I wish I still had it. Funny thing was I'd spend an hour shooting it and 2 hours cleaning it, because you got to get a clean patch. When you read the gun man, make sure your last patch. Oh, this one's blue. I got to go again. Oh no. And the hoppies is spilled all over the desk and delaminating the furniture. But we'll come back to that in a minute. But at any rate, I felt, because I had grown up non-gun, I felt an immense responsibility to be safe and proficient. So I started going to the indoor range, and I'd fire 200 rounds of 9mm every week. And I didn't really even know what I was doing, but they sold pop cans on a string. You could buy a pop can on a string for $0.25, and I started at 21 feet and I backed it out. And pretty soon I'm shooting 200 rounds of 9mm every Monday night at a pop can on a string at 25 yards indoors.
Wow.
So I'm getting pretty good.
Yeah.
And then one day, and I don't really know what I'm doing, right? I just know that when I do these things, the pop can moves. And remember, it's been shot with 9mm 100 times. So I may be hitting it, it may not be moving. So I'm refining to get that sucker to move. Every time it's moving around, and it's basically a miniature swinger at 25 yards. So I'm getting pretty accurate. So something happened, and I wound up there on a Friday night instead of a Monday night, and they were having a bowling pin match. And it was a outlaw bowling pin match. It was I think at this time it was a proper table match, the little wing formation, pins got to fall. So I went and shot and came in second place. And then I realized, so I went to a couple more of those and realized that when I made my first shot, I tended to win the match. When I didn't make my first shot, I tended to come in second. So my very first ever dry fire drill was literally going from low ready to a bowling pin at 30 feet. The match was at 21 feet. So I thought, man, if I can do this at 30 feet, I was lucky to have a pretty big basement. Pretty big basement is required for shooting excellence, by the way, or the ability to dry fire outside, whichever. So here I am doing low ready, and I started winning that match, just dominating that match. And then they said, well, if you like this, you should come to Steel Challenge. I said, what's Steel Challenge? And they gave me the address and said, be here at 8. Okay. So I'm there at 8. And then they said, if you like this, you should come shoot IPSC. This was before USPSA split off, or right at the time USPSA was splitting off of IPSC. And then here I am at my first IPSC match. And I'll never forget my first stage. It was this big, wonky field course, and I shot every target twice, including the white ones.
Everybody gets some.
That's right. So I got over to my mentor, and back then it was a clipboard, obviously, and he's doubled over laughing. He's dropped his clipboard. He's like, next time, don't shoot the white ones. Okay, well, you guys didn't tell me that. Right? And then so I started shooting more USPSA, and one day I got this little card in the mail that said Steve Anderson A class production. And I'm like, because I'd switched to a Beretta by that time.
Because Die Hard.
Yeah, you just have to.
Yeah.
You just have to. And it said Steve Anderson A class production. So I took it to my buddy. I said, what does this mean? He goes, that means you're in A class. Well, what's A class? And he told me what A class was. It said it's top 75%, top 25%. Wow. How'd that happen? I didn't know I was shooting class fires. Right. In Southern Ohio, they were called qualifiers. And all I knew was, where's the qualifier? Don't shoot the hostage. you know,
Right.
and I'm shooting against farmers wearing mud boots, you know, for the most part. But my classifiers are counting. And then I said, what's after A class, master? What's after that, grandmaster? Well, you mean I just got to keep doing what I'm doing and I can be a grandmaster? Yep. Do I have to go to nationals? Nope. Do I have to travel all over the place? Nope. Just keep doing what you're doing. And then about that time, my buddy Kyle Ferris, who, if anybody is on the Enos forums, I know it's not as popular as it used to be, but he's Flex Money on the Enos forums, and he's probably not very active anymore. But at that time, we were there at the very beginning of the Brian Enos forums, and there's like 50 of us, you know, because this was the infancy of the internet. So he came across a deal to buy a Dillon 650 and two open guns, and he sold me one of those open guns for the price of the whole package, because that's just kind of what he's, you know, his name is Flex Money for a reason. Let's just put it that way. So here again, now I've got this Caspian open gun, 27 round magazine, compensator, red dot. I'd never even seen a red dot before, right? And I'm like, this is magical. This is literally a lightsaber. There's nothing I cannot do with this. And previously, the same mentor that dropped a clipboard when I had all the no shoots had told me some dry fire might help. That's where the bowling pin drill came from.
Mm-hmm.
So now I know what a classifier is, and now at this time, as mostly the 99 series classifiers, a lot of standing and shooting, I figured out that if I could shoot six on anything, reload and shoot six on anything pretty quick, I could be a grandmaster. And about 9 months later, that happened. I became a grandmaster.
So you
And
went from A to grandmaster in about 9 months, give or take.
so, yeah, I don't remember anything in open. I'm sure I came out A class. I've never been below A class. I don't know if I'm sure I was in master class for a short time, but
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't very long.
Gotcha. That's pretty phenomenal. So from there, like you became grandmaster. Then what? I know, like I know your story a little bit better, but you wanted to make it to like the elite of the elite. You know, you wanted to be on the super squad, right?
Well, no,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
that's something that's extremely important. I didn't have a goal after grandmaster.
Okay.
There wasn't anything that could inspire me to keep working that hard or harder than making grandmaster. And I need everybody to know I've never been a national champion. My best nationals finish, I think, was 17. That was the year they put me on the super squad, or the first year they did. We could talk about that a little bit if you want to, because that's pretty important for the mental game.
Sure.
I didn't have another goal. Remember, I was raised by Christian music teachers. They don't drink the blood of their enemies from the lamenting skulls of their women. That's just
Right.
not, you know, and it's not a participation trophy. It's, you need to go out and do your best. And if you want to get better, you're going to practice more. But winning wasn't the thing. The thing was doing your best, the best you could do as far as you wanted to go. It wasn't about beating people. It was about excellence. Right. And I just never had another goal. And then life, as you know, can get complicated. And it doesn't take much to happen in your life to make putting two holes in a cardboard target not very important.
Right.
You know, we think it's really, and it is important, but it doesn't take much to happen in your life for that to not be the most important thing anymore. So I had a few of those.
Gotcha. So when did you're an author? You've
Oh yeah.
you've you've uh you've published 3 books.
Mm-hmm.
So when did those come out, and why did those come about? I know
So
I
I
know
was,
we in every single one of our class we tell people that dry fire is one of the pillars to get better, and you got to have a plan. And I tell them I could care less what your plan is. It's got to be written down, or you could just do the easy button and go and buy this book, Refinement and Repetition, and do the drills that are in that book. So
yeah.
how did that come about?
So I was the first grandmaster in Ohio.
Okay.
Remember, this is the infancy of the internet, so you can't go to YouTube and watch Bob Vogel. You know, there were some pretty cheesy VHS tapes floating around. There were a couple of DVDs of nationals, but there wasn't a lot of information available, and there was no information available on the mental side of it. And so the first book came around because people would ask me, "Hey, how in the world did you make Grandmaster?" I said, "Well, I got these 12 drills." So I scribble them down, and here you go. Remember, raised by Christian music teachers. So I got tired of scribbling down drills and giving them away for free. And if your younger listeners still have Google open, they're going to want to Google Kinkos, right? So I used to go to Kinkos at 10 o'clock at night after I got off work at the record store, and I would make these books. And somebody listening probably has the first edition. I don't want to get one out because it'll make too much noise, and we'll get hate mail from Arik Levy. But the first few editions didn't have a cover; it was just a clear cover with the title page. And there's probably a couple of hundred of those floating around. But I used to go to Kinko's and make them myself. And there I am at 10 o'clock working the coil binding, and then a very interesting thing happened. I continued to compete, but I didn't have a goal, right? And what I thought my Grand Master card was like literally a credit card where I could just go hand it in and win the match. And that was true for the most part locally, not because I was so great, but I was a grandmaster and I was working harder than anybody else. I mean, there was nobody working anywhere near as hard as me. There was a time when practicing wasn't considered to be cool, at least where I was competing. It was more like, come out once a month and have fun with your buddies. I was the first guy around here to take it really seriously. So now I'm a grandmaster, but anytime I go out of my little comfort zone, I'm getting beat. And I don't know why. Remember, there's no YouTube, there wasn't even practice score. So you had to wait for a local match. You had to wait 4 days to get the results typically, because the guys got to go home and put them in a spreadsheet, and then for major matches, I don't know how long you've been going to major matches, but they used to put the stages, they would staple them up on the side of the building, and if you didn't have a mic, you'd start at the top. If you did have a mic, you'd start at the bottom trying to find your name. But there wasn't. So the point is, there's not a lot of real-time feedback. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know why I was getting beat. I had no idea. And so that brought about the second book, which is the introduction of the mental game. As we alluded to earlier, at my first nationals, they put me on the super squad. And to this day, I don't know why, because I'd never shot a major match. I'm assuming because I had a pretty high percentage of the overall. Front Sight used to publish top Grand Master, and I was probably at 99% or something like that. And that's probably why they did it. But I went and I actually rused. I made up a ruse to call Lanny Basham because Travis Tomasi had recommended with winning in mind. And I wasn't going to pay for a class because I don't think it's that important. And so I thought, if I call this Lanny Basham guy, tell him it's for an interview for a book, maybe he'll talk to me. And so I had all these questions. All these questions were just made up to get to the one that I really wanted to ask him, and it was this: hey, Lanny, they put me on the super squad. I don't feel like I belong there. What do I do? He goes, quit. What do you mean? Quit the sport. I don't want to quit the sport. Well, then you got to quit thinking that way. And then the third book is, how everything starts out pretty complicated. Everything starts out pretty simple, right? You take somebody to the range, it's pretty simple, right? Let's be safe. Let's get a good grip and a good trigger pull. And then it gets really complicated. We got to do all this other stuff. And then eventually it returns back to simplicity. Okay, hey, let's just get a good grip and a good trigger pull, right? So my third book, Get to Work, is the return to simplicity and the desire. What I've always tried to do ever since I started trying to help people is to save them years of struggle, right? If you were going to teach me how to drive a police car, you'd want to save me years of struggle. If you're going to teach me how to run a machine gun, you're going to want to save me years of struggle, right? You want to get all those newbie mistakes out of the way so we can get down to business. So that's what I try to do, is save people years of struggle. I've got this stuff pretty well figured out.
Yeah. And so just my backstory a little bit. I've trained with you, I guess technically 3 times, 2 times on the range, doing your on-range shooting training. And then 1 time I did the mental management class. Mm-hmm. Actually, about 2 years ago to the day. It was August 2020, I believe, is when I took that class. One of my questions was, how did you meet Lanny Basham? But you just said you just randomly called him because you had some questions. before you went to nationals. How did you get so? How did you get from, hey, I'm just calling Lanny because I want to know how do I compete at the super squad, to being a certified mental management coach through Lanny Basham?
That was that was a pretty long process. I suppose what it was. Well, I know exactly what caused it, but there's a little bit of backstory to it. So now I'm giving classes, and I'm dispensing as much mental game advice as I possibly can during the class. And then, if you remember, we had a string of so-called mass shootings, and there were some gun control laws being talked about, as there always are, you know. And one of my buddies said, "Hey, you need to go do mental management just in case we lose the Second Amendment." Right? And I don't think we're going to lose the Second Amendment in our lifetime, but I think it probably is inevitable that we will. Um, I hate to say that on a firearm show, but
Sure.
I think eventually, and we're talking hundreds of years probably, but I think the Second Amendment eventually goes away. Um, so what he said to me was, he said, you need to get certified for this mental stuff so that you can work outside of the firearms industry, just in case something happens to the gun world. And even if we don't get as extreme as Second Amendment going away, if we get another 10-round mag ban, what does that do to USPSA? What does that do to PCC? What does that do to limited? What does it do to open? You know, what does it do to competition shooting? And so I just went and did it, and it's been wonderful. I love it so much.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I've taken that class and I tell people all the time, and I'll say it here. It's probably one of the best classes I've ever taken. Uh, let's step aside from like firearms, like just life in general. I think
Mm-hmm.
as much as I took, I was a A class shooter, I believe, or maybe a B. I think I was a B class shooter when I took that mental management class, and it wasn't, I don't know, 3 matches later, 4 matches later after that class, I'm now almost a, master class. I've since then have obtained master class, but it was like the mental aspect was perfect for the shooting, but everything that I took out of that class, I use in my day-to-day life, raising kids, just everything else non-shooting related. Um, so that being said, give a little insight on what that mental management class is all about, and how it helps you not only with shooting, but like me, outside of just shooting world, my real life world.
Sure. Mental management, the strict definition of it is, it's the process of improving the probability of having a consistent mental performance under pressure on demand. Let's go back through that one more time, because that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's the process, so it's a recipe of improving the likelihood of having a consistent mental performance under pressure on demand. It's essentially the owner's manual for the human brain under pressure. Because we don't feel pressure, things are pretty easy. And I believe pressure is stress caused by the perceived importance of the event or the actual importance. But sometimes the perceived importance isn't the same thing as the actual importance. You know, sometimes they are. Like talking to a hot chick in a bar is not that important.
Right.
Back in our single days, obviously,
Right.
but at the time, it sure seems important. You know, so yeah, it's the owner's manual for the human brain under pressure. And there are three things going on in your mind at all times, and mental management kind of gives you the ability to have like a heads up display of those three things, you know, like the battery gauge and the notifications, and hey, here's what's going on in my mind. First step is to be aware of these things. The next step is to take control of them.
Okay. And so you're certified through Lanny Basham to teach. I'm guessing it's like trademarked mental management classes. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
right. Right.
Okay.
So anybody in the world can give a seminar on the mental game. They can call it whatever they want. But if you want to use these terms, and if you want to call it mental management, you got to be certified by Lanny, and it's extremely expensive.
So people who don't know Lanny Basham, I know you know him much better than I do, but maybe a little background on him, on how he developed this mental management philosophy, as it
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, sure. He choked at the Olympics in 1972. What's a choke?
Are you asking me?
Mm-hmm.
I guess not performing at the level you think you're supposed to perform at.
Yeah, it's when a mental error causes a technical error.
Okay.
Okay. And a choke is usually a pretty severe one that's probably going to cost you the competition. Okay. Because everybody's going to make a mistake in competition. A choke would be a very serious error that we think is going to take us out of the running. Okay. And what's interesting is you may have experienced this. Sometimes we shoot pretty good after a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because now, and you'll even hear guys say it, well, the pressure's off. I'm shooting for fun. And a lot of times they'll shoot really good after that because now they're back to what we'll call a subconscious performance, or to use some other terms, they're out of their own head. They're not overthinking. But the question is, how do we get there without the big mistake? Right. And that's what Lanny wanted to know. So Lanny knew it wasn't a rifle problem. He was competing in Olympic rifle small bore. A lot of folks don't know he was shooting at 22.
Okay.
And if we don't think that's impressive, we got to remember that the bullseye is about that big. It's about
Right.
as big as a pencil eraser.
Wow.
So, but at any rate, he knows it isn't a rifle problem. So he goes and talks to other gold medalists. What are you thinking about? What's the mental game? Back then it was called mental toughness. And either you had it or you didn't. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody was teaching it. Maybe they couldn't teach it, So he starts talking to gold medalists, and because he, even after his choke, he won the silver because he came back pretty strong after his choke. And now he's talking to these gold medalists, and he's just writing down everything they tell him. Pretty soon, he's starting to see some similarities. And he has these stack of index cards of everything these guys are telling him, and he starts putting together the system. And then he went back to the Olympics in 1976 and won the gold. I'd love to tell your listeners who don't know much about Lanny, these little mental conversations we have with ourselves, all these little inner voices, all this self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1972, his inner dialogue was this: "Hey Lanny, what do you got to do today?" "Oh, I got to beat a guy I've never beat and win a gold medal." "Do you know how to do those things?" "Nope."
So what did his mental conversation turn into after the fact?
In 1976, it was, "Hey Lanny, what do you got to do today?" "That's easy. I got to preload my first shot."
Gotcha.
"What do you got to do after that?" "The gun will go off." "What are you going to do after that?" "Reload the next shot." Preload the next shot. You know how to do those things? I invented those things. I'm the best in the world at doing those things.
Right. So he was focusing on the process at that point
Right.
and putting all of his attention on the process.
It's tough to do. But
Yes, it
yeah,
is.
yeah. It's so you got to think of this stuff like a recipe. I'm not very good in the kitchen. I'm certainly not a gifted chef. I don't care about cooking one bit. But if you give me a recipe that I can understand and you give me the ingredients, I can make the thing. Right.
Absolutely.
Somebody who spends a lot of time in the kitchen doesn't need the recipe quite so much. Right. So, yeah, process, man.
So one of the things I wanted to tell you, like the mental game aspect when it comes to shooting, right? I could tell you all kind of stories that it's changed my life with my kids or whatever I do on my day to day. But when I became a masterclass shooter, I went to a match and I knew exactly what I needed. And I know the classifier. I'm walking around before the match and looking at all the stages. It's not a classifier match. It's just a regular match. And I get to, I think the third stage that I'm walking in, it's thunder and lightning is the classifier. And I instantly started smiling. And it was like, it's mine. Like I've got it. Before I ever shot that stage, I started on like stage one. And when I got to stage three, it was just a matter of now I'm just going to go and do. And at the end of the stage, I'm going to be a masterclass shooter. Um, 2 stages after that, so I go and I shoot it, and I run like a 94 percentile or something like that. So 2 stages after is another classifier. And I remember thinking for a split second, maybe I should zero this because if it's like a low A or like like really low score, it may count and knock out one of my good stages that will get me to master class. And it literally went in one ear and out the other because then I told myself, and kind of bringing up the journal, right? But then I told myself, I am a master class shooter. Like, just go be it doesn't matter where you're at now. I'm a master class shooter. Just go be a master class shooter on this stage. It doesn't matter that it's a classifier or whatever. that stage, I ended up having a higher percentile than the other one that I'm smiling, knowing I'm going to be a masterclass shooter, you know? So
Yeah.
the mental aspect of, like, I don't know if it's act like you've been there before, but knowing that I'm a masterclass shooter in your class that you teach, you have everybody come up with a phrase or like a I don't want to give away, but like the pay value, right? Why are you doing whatever you're doing, and what do you want to accomplish? And my phrase was, I am a master class shooter. At the time I was a B class shooter, and I wrote it down just like you're supposed to on note cards. It was everywhere in my house. I'd get in the car, and instead of seeing the speedometer, I'd see my card with everything that, I am, and then so I come to that stage. I'm technically still an A class shooter, but I'm telling myself, you know what? Why are you going to zero it? Why don't you just go and put another masterclass score up there? And then, you just jump into masterclass, not just sneak over the line, and it happened. So that mental aspect is phenomenal, shooting or even outside of shooting, but talk about the journal, because I kind of brought that up, and I think that is, a lot of people maybe would think that's not, maybe a stupid idea, or why waste your time or anything like that. So talk a little bit about you getting me one to make a journal, but journaling your successes in life.
So if when people leave the mental management class, they're probably most people, I shouldn't say most, many of them will only utilize about 90% of it. And there's two things that they won't do. They won't keep a journal, and they won't follow through with the repetition on the directive affirmation. They'll write it out, no problem, but they won't get the repetition of it, right? And those two things are linked, okay? In our lives, in our careers, at our matches, we always get what's normal. We don't get what we want necessarily, we get what's normal, okay? And that turns into your self-image, right? Whether you exercise or not, how much you drink, or if you drink, how fast you drive, right? Those are all functions of self-image. Well, those things can be changed, but they require pay value, right? And you're into working out. You like to work out, right? Well, I recently I was on a 45-day streak of not missing a single workout, and then I almost cut my finger off getting something out of the lawnmower, and then I got a deep vein thrombosis in my leg. I got a blood clot in my leg. Well, these two things prevent me from working out. So now I was able to work out, and then I wasn't. So it was normal for me to work out, and now it's abnormal. So the fingers healed up, blood clot's gone. So now it's becoming normal again for me to work out, right? Well, that's not just a switch that you flip unless you have extremely high pay value, right? If if my wife signs me up for a photo shoot that says shirtless hunks of Licking County, well, that's pay value, right? Now I'm going to hit this program hard. But if my goal is just to get in a little bit better shape, that's not a lot of pay value. I mean, it's there, but it's not. It doesn't drive you the way. And this is why choosing the right goal is so important. You'll know it's the right goal when it inspires you to change your lifestyle. That's the right goal. Because anything else, you may or may not get there, but it's not going to happen very quickly. And going back to goals again, deadlines are only useful if you can exponentially increase your training, right? So if you say to me, you want to be a Grand Master, I'll say, cool, here's how to do it. I know this will work. If you say to me, I need to be a Grand Master this year for some reason, or I need to win nationals this year because I'm going to retire, well, that deadline is only useful if you can exponentially increase your training. Again, if my wife signs me up for shirtless hunks of Licking County photo shoot, I have to exponentially increase my diet and fitness
Right.
if I want to look good for that photo shoot. You know,
So in that journal, kind of makes it so you, not only are you writing it down, but you're believing it, because you're only writing down, or you're writing down the things you do well at. And so it just turns into like, when you're working out for 45 days, it's like you to work out.
Right.
And the days that you don't work out, that's the abnormal. My journal is full. So a good story about that. This isn't about me, but after I took that mental management class, I started the journal, and I don't know how many entries I had in there. From August till October, handful of journal entries, and I shot a Virginia State match. At the time, I was B class, and the second or third stage that I shot, it was 11 stages. The second or third stage, it was terrible, a bad stage. Ended up going to lunch right after that. And I was in such a foul mood. Like I could have let that just ruin the entire thing. But I ended up reading every entry into, instead of eating, I read every entry in my journal. And it was like, you know what? That was the anomaly. It's like you to shoot very well. It's not like you what you just did. Turns out I ended up winning B class that year and having an absolutely horrendous stage, close to the bottom. But
Hmm.
it just took that affirmation. And by writing it down, like now I'm believing it, I'm understanding it, and it is like me just to go and shoot really well.
So I want to address the skeptics right now. There are people listening to this who think YouTube idiots are telling me that all I have to do is write down what I want and it'll happen. It's not what we're saying, right? So the journal goes to self-image. Self-image is only a third of it, right? But what you're doing is you're taking an abnormal idea and you're making it normal. All you're doing is you're changing what's normal. And I don't know why, but the expression "like me" has never resonated with me. What I like to do is, because it's in the book, right? It's like me to shoot good on classifiers. Well, sometimes that sets off an internal BS detector because self-image can be stretched, but it can't be lied to, right? If my goal is to be a millionaire, I can't write down I'm a millionaire and believe it. What
Right.
I can do is write down I am becoming, right, a high net worth individual. Now that I can believe, that's going to inspire me to make some changes, right? So, um, if 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 your wife says, "Hey, honey, let's paint the kitchen," what's your first response?
No.
Right? And now she starts saying it several times a day. Hey, let's paint the kitchen. Okay. And then she brings home color samples and gets you to look at them. What she's doing is she's normalizing the idea of painting the kitchen. It's the same way we wind up with puppies. Let's get a puppy. No, I'm the one that's going to, well, I'm on my fourth consecutive year of raising puppies. Okay. And that means I get up every day at 5:45, whether I want to or not. I haven't slept in at home in 4 years because
Man,
you just can't,
right.
you know. But we keep talking about puppies. Pretty soon we're looking at pictures of puppies. Pretty soon we're going to see puppies. Pretty soon you've got a puppy. And that's how these things happen. What you have to do is take the things that you want in your life, in your shooting career, whatever it is, and you've got to make those ideas normal, right? I always exercise before I whatever, right? I always dry fire 25 minutes a day. And what you're doing is you're creating triggers. You know how people have triggers, phrases or words kind of set them off, and that's kind of a negative thing. Well, you're what you're doing is you're making decisions in advance. You're making the decision before you have to make the decision. I always dry fire 25 minutes a day. So I get home from work on Thursday, I'm not feeling it. That trigger, I always.
Hmm.
And when I do it, that makes it more likely that I'll do it again. If I don't do it, that makes it more likely that I won't do it because now that's becoming normal. So all we have to do is we got to figure out what does the human being look like that can do the thing that I want to do. Now we know what that person looks like. Now we're going to compare that to ourselves and see what's different, right? If I want to run a 4 minute mile, I got to figure out what does a human being look like? How do they behave that can run a 4 minute mile? Take a shooting thing. Um, I'm sure everybody knows what a bill drill is, right? I want to do a sub-second. I want to do a bill drill under 2 seconds. Okay, well, the person that can do that, what does their first shot look like? Well, it's probably well under a second. Okay, mine's a second and a half. Well, I got to figure that out. Okay, I've got to become the human being that can fire that first shot in under a second. Okay. What's the rest of it look like? Well, the splits are probably in the teens. Okay. Can I do that? Not today. What do I need to do to get my splits in the teens? And so I become the human being who can do a sub two bill draw. And you just got to figure out what that looks like, you know. And you don't even have to be right, by the way. You don't necessarily have to be right. You just have to believe that those qualities will produce the result. One thing I used to say to myself, even before mental management, is I would ask myself all the time, what would a grandmaster do? All right. So I get home from work. My first wife is watching Friends reruns because that's what you did back then. And I'd ask myself, okay, I have a decision to make. What would a grandmaster do? Watch Friends reruns or go dry fire? He'd probably go dry fire.
Mm-hmm.
And you can apply that to anything, right? What would a millionaire do? Would a millionaire invest or would he spend? You
Right.
know, it depends. Um, and if you take a goal like that, you can literally make every decision of your life, if you want to, based on that goal. If you have kids, what would a good parent do?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Get hammered and drive home with the kids in the back seat? Probably not. Probably not. What would a great parent do? Well, a great parent would skip the party and take his kids to the park. Okay.
Right.
I want to be a great parent, so that's what I'm going to do. So you make those decisions in advance so that when the time comes, you know what to do.
And that's wonderful. So on that, how do people get into your classes? How do people follow you? Uh, I know I did your mental management class via like a Zoom meeting. Are you still doing those or
Yeah,
only in person
no, we can do
or
them.
okay, well give the whole pitch on Anderson shooting. How do people get a hold of you? How do people train with you?
All right. So the shooter I want is the shooter who needs to save years of struggle. I would love to be the king of the former C class shooters, right? I wish we had a before and after video of the day I met you and what you look like now, right? You were all thumbs and left feet with the first time I saw you with a gun, but you had a very important ingredient. You had more enthusiasm than anybody on the ranch, and you were going to do it till you got it right. And you didn't care how foolish you looked in the process. You didn't care what anybody thought. You were going to get it right, and you were going to do it until you did. That's who I want. Okay. And the easiest way to get a class is to shoot me an email and say, "Hey, Steve, I live in wherever you live. I want to do a class." So if you want to do a class and you can arrange the range, then you get the class for free. Okay. And then typically I'll come stay with you at your house, which is kind of fun. Josh Shaw, is that
Yes.
correct? Uh, I stayed with him. He is, you got to watch out when you stay with him because he likes to play romantic music during dinner. So it can be a little off putting.
He
He
still
plays
tells the
this.
story. He says it's the you were the best roommate he's ever had. And
I'm a great roommate.
if you ever come to Northern Virginia and wanted to live there, he wants you to move in with him. That he
Yeah.
that you guys have
Yeah.
had a blast.
Yeah. It was awesome. It was so cool. We're like, so at any rate, so you can get a class for free. There are there's two technical classes we do, standard and advanced. They're not very different. Standard says, "Hey, I'm in competition. I'm kind of stuck where I'm at. Help me." And then we do less reps of more things because there's 10 or 12 things you need to know if you're stuck. Okay. The advanced class says, I know most of this stuff and I want to dominate. Okay. So we do more reps of less things. Right. The advanced class assumes you know most of this stuff, but for whatever reason, it's not happening subconsciously. Right. Everybody shoots their best when they're not thinking about it, but they don't know how to get there. Right. So those are the two pistol classes that I shouldn't say pistol because people used to ask me about PCC all the time. Now they just bring them and they don't even ask me anymore. So we get the only thing I can't help you with on the PCC is like hardcore rifle technique because I've never studied the rifle. But if you know how to hold it and you know what to do, I can help you with everything else. I wouldn't want a brand new PCC shooter. Let's just put it that way.
Gotcha.
Because there's better guys than me to teach rifle technique. Guys like you, guys like Josh Shaw, and then mental management. It's there's three classes. Each one is 90 minutes to 2 hours. All you need to do is shoot me an email and say, "Hey, Steve, I want to do mental management. Here's when I'm available." Because I'm available pretty, I shouldn't say anytime, but I got a pretty wide window in the Eastern time zone when I'm available. I just don't know when you're available. So it doesn't do me a lot of good to put a class out, right? Um, we we do that. I actually do evening classes on a pretty regular basis. The problem is if you don't check the website periodically, or if you don't listen to the podcast, you may not know about them. But all you got to do is say, "Hey, I want to do this mental management thing. Here's when I'm available." And then we figure out a time, and then I invite some other people to join us because now we have a framework, right? Now we know when it's happening. Um, and typically do it over 3 days. We could do it all in one day, but a lot of yours was probably 3 days or 2 days, I would imagine.
It was just one. We did it one day.
Oh, we did online all the way through. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good way to do it. But you have to be really passionate to
Mm-hmm.
to get it all done in one day. Otherwise, we lose interest. Um, I had one guy tell me, um, a really good friend of mine. He said, "I want to do this mental management, but I'm not sitting still for 6 hours of anything. If you can do it in 3 hours, we can do it right now." It's like challenge accepted.
Right.
But yeah, just shoot me an email, steve@andersonshooting.com. Say I want in for mental management, and we'll get it figured out. It's $250 for the 3 classes, and it is probably, as you'll attest, the best $250 you can spend.
I would not disagree with that at all. It's the best 250. If you want it to be a shooting, like specifically just for your shooting career to get better, it's worth the 250, but you're going to take so much more out of it than just shooting. It's everything. It's a life-changing class.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Also, you have a podcast as well. That shooting show, is that correct?
Yeah.
Awesome. So download that after you listen to this. Go and download, subscribe to his podcast, Steve's podcast as well. Specifically, stays in the competition world of shooting, also mental management. But it's a podcast that I download each week. Every live episode or every new episode that comes out, I am getting those as well. So I would tell all the listeners to listen to Steve's podcast.
And by the way, this doesn't need to be restricted to competition. There's a lot of things in the tactical slash self-defense world that we get people coming in sometimes from that, and I don't know what you call that world. Just call it tactical self-defense for lack of a better word. I can't tell you how many guys we've gotten a sub-second first draw from concealed carry appendix, you know, just over and over and over. And it takes about 10 minutes. If you're in the 1-5 area, you'll do a 99 before we leave the line. Because we'll dry fire a bunch and then you'll do it. It's just as simple as that. So you don't need to be a competition shooter to come to one of these classes. It helps, but it's not necessary. And I don't know to what extent this has been studied, but I have heard numerous people in the tactical world say outside of force on force, which is problematic for a lot of reasons, that timer going off is the closest thing we can come up with to duplicate pressure.
So Mike Green tells a story, and it's his story, so I'm probably paraphrasing and getting it slightly wrong. But basically, he says that his first competition that he shot with a guy named Kyle Lamb, he was more nervous on that first stage than when he was like clearing houses overseas.
Yeah,
That it's not direct correlation, right? It's a different
sure.
type of stress, but he was as nervous as he's ever been shooting a USPSA competition.
Yeah. And remember, pressure is stress caused by the perceived importance of the event. So that competition was not that important, but in his mind, he perceived it to be very, very, very important. Reputation, ego, all that stuff, shooting in front of your peers, winning, losing, all that stuff gets up in your head. Well, what do I need to do? Right? Mental management is about what do I need to do that's within my control to make the result that I want more likely.
Awesome.
And it took me from probably a C class stepdad to a master class stepdad knocking on Grand Master. Because kids do things and we go red. Well, now I don't go red anymore. Now I go yellow, right? And I take a minute and I think, what do I need to do right now to maximize the outcome of this situation? I used to ruin dinner if the kid would eat a green bean before we said the prayer, because that's a rule, right? You got to say the prayer before you eat your beans or whatever it is. I'd ruin dinner over that every single time. And then my wife says to me, "Why don't you let me handle the small stuff?" And I say, "What's the small stuff?" She goes, "I'll let you know when it's not small." And she just handles it, and I just smile, and it's great. If there's something big, we talk about it.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect way to end it, Steve. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. It's an honor to talk to you, right? You're one of my mentors. You've got me in the correct direction to get where I'm at right now. So I can't thank you enough. If listeners want to train with Steve, send Steve, andersonshooting.com, or send him an email, steve@andersonshooting.com, and he can get you squared away. I know you're going to be in the Richmond, Virginia area, I believe in September. Kevin McPhee got a hold of me at the last match and said, "Hey, I think Steve's coming down sometime in September."
Yeah, let's take a look here. This is a game we play called "Let's Take a Look in the Schedule Book." There's a song that goes with it, but your tactical listeners won't like the song. Let's take a look in the schedule book. All right, so mental management, November the 4th at the Cavalier Gun Club Clubhouse, and then advanced pistol Saturday, 5 and 6 of November.
Okay, so if you're in the Virginia area, or if you're willing to travel, that would be awesome. It's a great facility. It'll be a great time taking both of those classes, doing the mental management and go ahead and do the advanced class. I would say it's worth every dollar that you would spend to get up here and train with Steve. If you want to train with us at Green Ops, our schedule is online, green-ops.com. You'll find classes in Virginia. You'll find classes in Texas. Also, like Steve, we have guns and we'll travel. So if you are in another location and want to get some tactical firearms training from us, send us an email, info@green-ops.com, and we will come to you. Lastly, if you want to reach out to me, I am Wreck-It Luke on Instagram. You can send me a DM if you have questions or show ideas, things like that. We're always willing to listen and try to put out good content for everybody. So with that, Steve, thanks again, man. It was awesome. I love talking to you. I could literally go for another 2 hours if we had that type of time. But thanks for coming on. Mom, love you. Everybody else, we kind of like you. So get better at shooting. Go check out Steve, all of his offerings, and hopefully we'll see you out on the range sometime soon.